History books say George Custer made his last stand at the Little Bighorn. But what if that story is only half true? One Lakota warrior, Chief Gall, witnessed the battle from beginning to end. His account doesn't just challenge the official record, it flips it on its head. From jammed rifles to desperate hand-to-hand combat, Gall's forgotten testimony reveals a version of Custer's defeat few Americans have ever heard. This is the untold story of Custer's last stand, through the eyes of the man who helped end it. Before we continue, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Gall stood over the bodies of his wives and children, smoke rising from his burning lodge, the cries of battle echoing across the valley. Something inside him broke. In that instant, grief hardened into vengeance. What followed wasn't the clean, heroic tale told in classrooms. The real story began with a father's heartbreak and ended in one of the bloodiest, most misunderstood battles in American history. When Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer rode into the valley of the Little Bighorn in June 1876, Chief Gall was already a seasoned legend among the Hunkpapa Sioux, brave, calculating, and fiercely loyal. His courage had earned him scars and songs, and his wisdom was so respected that Chief Sitting Bull had adopted him as a brother. Together they stood as guardians of their people's freedom, brothers in spirit against a nation determined to erase them. By late June, word raced through the vast camp. Soldiers were coming. Custer and the 7th Cavalry were on the move. For Gall, this wasn't merely another fight. It was fate closing in. That morning, Sioux scouts found abandoned army ration boxes nearby, proof the enemy was close. When spotted, the scouts fled, and Custer realized the element of surprise was lost. His only option was speed, strike hard before the Sioux could scatter. Scouts rushed back to warn the village. Sitting Bull called his war council, Gall, Crazy Horse, and others, to prepare their defense. From the hills, American scouts watched the sprawling encampment, unaware that they were being watched in return. Soon, Gall and his allies learned that Custer had split his command into 3 columns, a fatal blunder that would doom him. Custer led 5 companies north to attack from above. Major Marcus Reno took 3 companies to strike from the south. Captain Frederick Benteen moved west to cut off escape. On paper, it was the perfect trap. In reality, it became a disaster. Inside the camp, panic erupted. Some argued to flee before the soldiers arrived, but before anyone could act, Reno's men thundered across the river, slamming into the southern edge of the village. Sitting Bull and I were at the very point where Reno attacked, Gall later recalled. His own lodges lay directly in the path of the charge. Gunfire ripped through the teepees. Bullets tore hides and flesh alike. Women screamed. Children scattered. Warriors grabbed weapons. Gall sprinted through the smoke to find his family, his 2 wives, his 3 children. What he found instead left him hollow. They lay lifeless amid the wreckage of his lodge, cut down by rifle fire. They were killed there by the pale-faced warriors, he said. It made my heart bad. Among the Lakota, those words meant more than grief. They meant rage beyond reason. From that moment, Gall fought not only for his people, but for his dead. After that, he said simply, I killed all my enemies with the hatchet. Reno's men dismounted and advanced on foot. Gall rallied warriors and struck back with fury. Sitting Bull remained behind, performing sacred rituals, making medicine, calling on the spirits. On the battlefield, leadership passed to Gall and Crazy Horse, whose ferocity turned the tide. Their counterattack hit like a storm. Warriors poured from the timber, circling Reno's companies. Bullets tore through blue uniforms as the Sioux and Cheyenne pressed in. Outnumbered and surrounded, Reno's men began to panic. Then fate dealt its cruelest twist. Among Reno's ranks was Bloody Knife, a half-Hunkpapa scout who once lived among Gall's people. They had been bitter enemies for years. Gall despised him as a traitor. Bloody Knife loathed Gall for killing several of his kin. Moments later, a bullet smashed through Bloody Knife's skull, spraying blood across Major Reno. Gall hadn't fired the shot, but destiny had settled the score. Reno, drenched and horrified, lost control. His men broke and fled across the river in chaos. The retreat turned to slaughter. Warriors chased them through the shallows, pulling men from horses, striking them down in hand-to-hand combat. The river ran red before the survivors reached the safety of the bluffs. Gall wanted to finish them, but new gunfire echoed from the north. Custer had arrived. Gall gathered riders and charged toward the sound. What he saw next became one of history's most contested moments. He said he spotted Custer's 5 companies advancing cautiously along the ridges, pausing as they glimpsed the massive village below. One officer rode forward, scanning the valley through binoculars, a man with shorter hair than most. Only later did Gall realize it was Custer himself. Long hair, as the Sioux called him. Custer hesitated, perhaps realizing too late that he faced thousands of warriors, not a scattering of hostiles. Gall claimed it was then, before Custer attacked, that the Sioux struck first, catching the soldiers off guard. If true, it means Custer's last stand wasn't an assault at all, but a desperate attempt to survive. Other witnesses disagreed, insisting Custer charged first. Whatever the truth, by the time Gall reached the northern hills, the fight had dissolved into chaos. Custer's men were trapped, their single-shot Springfield rifles jammed from heat and dust, forcing them to draw revolvers. Warriors swarmed from every direction, some with only clubs or hatchets. They drove stampedes through the cavalry lines, scattering soldiers and cutting off escape. "It was a slaughter," Gall said later. "We took no prisoners. Our hearts were bad, and we cut and shot them all to pieces." The command split apart. On one ridge, Custer and his brothers Tom and Boston fought with 3 companies, making their final stand atop the hill that would bear his name. Gall never claimed Custer's death, but he knew that group fell quickly, overwhelmed and surrounded. To the southeast, Captain Keogh and Lieutenant Calhoun's companies fought with grim determination, retreating step by step, firing until every round was spent. Their bodies were later found piled together, proof that even doomed men can fight bravely. They fought strong, Gall said, but it did not save them. The battle around Custer's position lasted less than an hour, yet the wider fight raged on. Gall turned south again, seeking Reno, and perhaps one last measure of revenge. Reno's surviving men had dug in atop a hill, shaken and bloodstained. By afternoon, Benteen arrived with reinforcements, bringing their number to over 400. They moved cautiously toward Custer's last known position, unaware every man there was already dead. Gall and Crazy Horse led a renewed assault. The cavalry formed a circle, firing from shallow trenches as arrows and bullets rained down. Gall wanted to finish them that night, but Crazy Horse urged patience. Why waste lives when thirst and fear would do the work? "They will fall into our hands," Gall told his warriors, "when the thirst burns in their throats." By dawn, the soldiers were delirious. The wounded begged for water. A few crawled toward the river and were cut down by sharpshooters. The fight for a single bucket of water became an act of suicidal heroism, one that later earned several medals of honor. Then, in the blazing afternoon heat, everything changed. Scouts on the bluffs saw dust clouds rising to the east. The Big Dust, Gall called it. General Terry and General Gibbon were arriving. The army was closing in. The signal spread quickly. Disappear. Sitting Bull ordered the camp to move. By sunset, the vast Sioux village had slipped away into the Bighorn Mountains. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, or the Battle of the Greasy Grass as the Sioux knew it, was over. For the Sioux and Cheyenne, it was a stunning victory. For the U.S. Army, a national humiliation. But triumph was short-lived. The Army soon unleashed relentless vengeance, burning villages, killing buffalo herds, forcing the tribes to surrender or flee. Gall followed Sitting Bull north into Canada, clinging to the last fragments of freedom. Yet even there, peace proved fragile. Over time, Gall returned to the United States, settling on the Standing Rock Reservation. He shocked many by embracing Christianity and making peace with American officials. Some called him a traitor. Others saw a man who refused to let his people vanish. In 1886, 10 years after the battle, Gall returned to Little Bighorn as an honored guest. For the first time, white America listened to the story from the other side. Speaking through translators, Gall recounted what he remembered and what he'd lost. But the story shifted with each telling. Newspapers printed conflicting versions. In one, Gall fought Reno. In another, only Custer. In some, his family's death vanished completely. Was Gall tailoring his story for different audiences? Were reporters twisting his words? Historians still argue. Yet one truth remains. Gall gave the United States something it had never heard before, the native side of its own legend. His testimony stripped away the heroism and exposed the humanity beneath. It forced America to face not just a military defeat, but the moral one beneath it. And in the end, the image of Chief Gall endures. Warrior, father, survivor, standing over the ashes of his world, determined that the memory of his people and the truth of that day on the greasy grass would never be buried again.